Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard Wong here from New Zealand. So today we are going to look at the new Nikon Z6 mirrorless camera, and we are also going to compare it with the D750 and see how does this 24 megapixel full frame camera compare with each other. So I have only just recently reviewed the Nikon Z7 mirrorless camera, and today we are going to look at the Nikon Z6 mirrorless camera. So the Nikon Z7 and Z6, they are very similar camera. If you look at it from outside, they look identical because they share the same body design, and a lot of the components of these two cameras are also exactly the same. For example, the electronic viewfinder, the LCD screen at the back. Actually, the biggest difference between the two are the image sensor and also the autofocus system that is part of the image sensor as well. So instead of doing another review that is probably going to be very similar to my Z7 review because the two cameras are so similar, so I thought it'd be more interesting if I compare the Z6 with the D750, because after all, they are all Nikon's prosumer full frame camera. They both have a 24 megapixel sensor. The body is not a full-size pro body. As I said, it's a prosumer camera. And the price is also quite similar, especially if you compare the price of the D750 when it was originally launched. It would be very similar to the price of the Nikon Z6. So I'm planning to do two videos about the Nikon Z6. The first video is this one, which I'm going to talk about the body design, the handling, the image quality, and different features. For example, the video mode, the in-body image stabilizer, etc. in this video. So after that, in about a week's time, I'm going to do another video. In that video, I'm going to share with you my experience when I'm using the Z6 with the D750 side by side professionally, because I'm going to, there are a couple of weddings. I'm also going to be the photographer for the New Zealand Television Award next week. So yeah, I'm going to use the two cameras side by side, and I want to share with you my thoughts, my experience when using these two cameras, and how does this mirrorless camera compare to the DSLR. Is it going to be better or worse than DSLR? So if you don't want to miss the next video, please click the subscribe button, and at the same time click the thumbs up button to support this channel. Now first, let's talk about the body design first. The D750, I think it is probably one of the best handling camera in the Nikon family, or pretty much any DSLR camera. The body size is a medium size, so it's not too big, not too small, and the grip design is fantastic. Hold it in your hand, it just feels so comfortable. And there are tons of button switches everywhere on the camera, so if you want to customize the camera, you can easily do that. And even if you want to use it as a professional camera, the customization should be enough to satisfy your professional needs. Now let's talk about the Z6. As I've mentioned in the Z7 review, I really like the body design of the Z camera. The grip is pretty large. It feels very comfortable when you hold it in the hand. And while this is a prosumer camera, there are also quite a lot of buttons and switches around the camera. So if you want to customize it to exactly how you want, you can do it to a very large extent as well. If you put these two cameras side by side, then you notice the Z6 is still quite a bit smaller than the D750. So even though the grip is already very deep and very comfortable, if you have a slightly larger hand, my hand is not really large, but you will probably find the D750 is slightly more comfortable to hold. And also there are a few more external buttons on the D750. For example, the autofocus switch here, the flash button, there's a bracketing button. So some of these buttons are not on the Z6. Instead, you have to assign it to one of the customizable buttons. So if you talk about the number of buttons and switches on the body, the D750 definitely have a slight advantage in this area. So while the Z6 doesn't have as many direct access buttons and dials when you compare to the D750, Having the good touch interface does make it more versatile in terms of how do you want to control the camera. So the biggest thing when you are shooting with these two cameras is that with the Z6 you'll be mainly using the electronic viewfinder, while with the D750 you'll be using the optical viewfinder. So to me, I think the electronic viewfinder is definitely a big advantage when you compare to the optical viewfinder on the D750. Not only that, the electronic viewfinder on the Z6 is really large, really bright, very high resolution. It's actually also a little bit bigger than the optical viewfinder on the D750. I have been shooting it side by side quite a bit in the last few days already, and every time when I switch between the two, I always prefer what I see from the electronic viewfinder on the Z6. It just give you a lot more information when you compare to the optical viewfinder, and also it just handle the different lighting situation a lot better. Like for example, when you are shooting under very low light, with the optical viewfinder on the D750, especially when you pair it with some slightly slower lens. I'm not talking about really slow lens, even the f2.8 lens, you find that the viewfinder on the D750 is a lot dimmer, and sometimes when it's really low light, you can't really see your subject, so you can't really tell whether you're in focus or not, or of course the composition is harder to tell because you can't really see much. But with the Z6, you can almost always see the scene very bright and very clearly because it's coming through the image sensor, and the image sensor will boost up the image signal when it's under low light. So definitely that's a big advantage because you can always see the scene very clearly. So overall, I definitely prefer to use the electronic viewfinder, even though I have been shooting with DSLR for many years. And at the back of the camera, you have the tiltable LCD screen. This is the same as the D750. D750 also have the tiltable screen. The screen on the Z6 definitely feels stronger. It just feels more metal, and the hinge and everything just feel is quite a bit tougher than the more plasticky feeling on the D750. The shutter speed of the D750 is between 1/4000 second up to 30 second, and for the Z6 is 1/8000 second, and the other side is 30 second. And since both camera, the base ISO is ISO 100, and what that means is if you are shooting with a fast prime lens, for example 50 f1.4 prime lens, with the D750, quite often on the bright sunny days, you find that you already shooting at the fastest shutter speed. But if you want to shoot at f1.4, and then your photo will overexpose a little bit, with the Z6, because it can go up to 1/8000, so you have another stop. So the chance of overexposing photo when you're shooting at maximum aperture is quite a bit lower. Now, on the other hand, the sync speed of the D750 can go up to 1/250 second, but the Z6 is only 1/200 seconds. So if you shoot quite regularly with a speed light, then the D750 would be a slightly better camera to use. Both camera has a full frame 24 megapixel image sensor, so in terms of resolution, there's not much difference between the two. I have done a few test shots using the same lens, same setting, take photo with the two camera. I pretty much can't tell any difference between the two camera. But while there's no difference in terms of image resolution, in terms of the ISO range, then there's quite a bit of difference. With the D750, the ISO is from ISO 100 all the way up to ISO 51200. That's including the extended ISO range. For the Z6, the ISO is from ISO 100 all the way up to 2 million ISO. So that is a two-stop advantage if you just look at the numbers when you compare the Z6 compared with the D750. But that was just the factory numbers, and you probably know that just looking at the number itself doesn't tell you the full story. So what I did is that I shot photos from the base ISO all the way up to the maximum ISO on the two cameras, and then I convert the raw image to JPEG with zero noise reduction and also zero adjustment at all when I'm converting them from raw to JPEG. And looking at the results, I would say the D750, the result is actually pretty good. Even at ISO 12800, the image is still very usable. The quality is still pretty good. And compared with the Z6, overall I think the Z6, the high ISO performance is about maybe slightly over 1 stop better than the D750. So it may not be exactly 2 stop better, but that is still pretty impressive considering the D750 is very good in terms of high ISO performance. And next I shot some photos to see how the raw file would behave when you try to push it quite a bit in post-processing. The first photo, I underexposed the image by 5 stop on both camera, and after pushing them 5 stop with 0 adjustment, so there's 0 noise reduction and any adjustment at all, this is what it looks like. If you look at the result from the D750, it is pretty good. After a 5 stop push, the image is still quite usable, but if you compare it with the result from the Z6, then you notice the image from the Z6, while the details and noise level overall is quite similar, but the amount of the color noise from the Z6 is definitely quite a bit better. If you look at the D750, you can already see a bit of purplish color in the shadow area. With the Z6, there's very little amount of color noise in the shadow area. So next, I push it by 1 more stop. So I took 2 photos, 1 on each camera, by purposely underexpose them by 6 stop, and then I push them back in post-processing. And now this is very similar to what we see in the 5 stop, but pushing another stop does exaggerate the difference between the 2 cameras even more. With the D750, look at the shadow area, you can definitely see quite a lot of color noise when you compare to the Z6, which amazingly after a 6 stop push, it still looks very, very nice with 0 adjustment. Okay, next let's talk about the autofocus system. So with the D750, it has the Nikon's very famous 51-point autofocus system, which has been very well polished and trusted as it's been used on many of the Nikon professional DSLR cameras. On the other hand, with the Z6, it has Nikon's brand new hybrid autofocus system. So it's using a combination of on-sensor face detection system and also contrast detection system. So it's like 2 in 1. It has 273 face detection points. So on paper, it is a lot better than the D750's 51-point focus system. And another thing that I really like when I first start using it is that the autofocus points, unlike the 51-point autofocus system on the DSLR, those focus points are quite like center in the frame. So you the most you can go to the edge is still quite near the center. But with the Z6, you can basically move the autofocus point almost all the way to the edges because it covers 90% of the sensor width and height. And in real life, I found the Z6 autofocus system performs very well. The autofocus speed is very fast and very responsive. Compare it with the D750, I would say the Z6 autofocus is not any worse than the one on the D750. The only time that I feel the D750 perform better than the Z6 is when I'm shooting under low light condition. When I'm shooting under the low light, then I find that the Z6 will sometimes fail to acquire the target, while the D750 has no problem to lock on the target. However, I noticed there's one thing that can completely change the situation. There is actually a setting inside the menu system. It's called low light autofocus. By default, for some reason, Nikon turned that option off. So after I turn on the option, I found that the Z6 low light autofocus performance is actually a lot better. So there were quite a few times I was shooting under pretty low light condition, and the Z6 can actually lock on the target, even though take a bit of time, but eventually it can lock on the target. While when I switch back to the D750, it would just completely fail to find the target. So yes, definitely turn on the low light autofocus option in the menu. I really don't know why Nikon don't turn it on by default, because that really make a big difference in terms of low light autofocus performance. If you are a long-time Nikon DSLR shooter, you'll be quite familiar with the 51-point autofocus system on the D750 or one of the other professional camera. So you have the 3D tracking, you have the AF 9-point, 21-point, and 51-point, and then you also have the single-point. But with the Z6, Nikon has completely changed that. You no longer have the 3D tracking or the 9, 21, and 51-point. Instead, you have the single-point, the dynamic area, the wide area, and the auto area AF. So personally, I'm about 50-50 about these changes, because Nikon has removed or changed the autofocus system that a lot of their users are very familiar with. The new system, I kind of feel like it's a dumbed down version of its professional DSLR autofocus system. But on the other hand, I do see the new system is a lot more simplified and a lot easier to learn and know how to use. I can't remember how many times in the past 5 years or so I got people asking me, oh, what's the difference between the 3D tracking and the 51-point autofocus, whether I should choose between 9-point, 21-point or 51-point. So I got lots of questions from many different users. Some of them are actually professional photographers, so even them having a hard time trying to figure out which is the correct configuration of the autofocus they should use. So imagine for a new user, I believe the new, more simplified autofocus system on the Z6 will be a lot easier to learn. Now, what would be interesting to see is that when Nikon release their professional mirrorless camera in the future, whether they will continue on this new autofocus system, or they will go back to something that is more similar to their old DSLR autofocus system or not. That's something I'm quite curious. I'm going to wait and see. But regardless, I found the autofocus system on the Z6 very good, and I would say overall it is just as good, if not slightly better, than the autofocus system on the D750. I've also tried using some other third-party lenses on the Z6 with the f2C adapter. For example, the Sigma 50 1.4 that currently I'm mounted on the D750. So yeah, I have shot quite a number of photos using the Sigma on the Z6, and I didn't notice any problem at all. The autofocus accuracy and the speed and the consistency is pretty much the same as if it was mounted on the D750. So if you have some third-party lenses and if you have tried it on the Z6, please feel free to leave a comment below and let me know how your experience is. Now, another thing I try a lot with the Z7 and now with the Z6 is using old manual focus lenses. For example, like this one, this is a very old Nikon 50 1.4 lens. This is the one that actually comes with the Nikon F, the first Nikon film SLR camera, and I mounted onto the Z6, and I just absolutely love shooting with the manual focus lenses on the Z6 using the FTZ adapter. The reason is that with the peaking and also ability to zoom in when I'm shooting photos, that just make it so much easier and faster to shoot with the manual focus lens. Even if I'm shooting with a fast prime lens like this 50 1.4, the accuracy and the result is still very, very good. And also what I did is that I actually set the YouTube profile, and then I switched to that one, and then I assigned the two front customized button. One of them I set it to turn on and turn off the peaking, and the other one is turn on and turn off the magnification. So with these two settings assigned to the two customizable buttons, I found that I can just shoot with manual focus lens very quickly and very accurately. With the older lens, you normally have quite a lot more lens flare and other artifacts. If you are shooting with a DSLR which using the optical viewfinder, you actually don't see most of those artifacts when you are just looking through the viewfinder. You only see it when you play back the image. But with the electronic viewfinder on the Z6 or the Z7, you can actually preview any artifact. You can preview the lens flare. You can preview when the contrast drop quite a bit. very clearly and easily on the electronic viewfinder, and then you can make some adjustment to maybe your composition or your setting or something before you capture the photo. So yes, the Z6 is definitely a very good news for people who has a good collection of manual focus or Nikon lenses in your camera cabinet. In terms of the burst speed, with the D750, you can shoot up to 6.5 frames per second, which is actually pretty good for a prosumer camera. With the Z6, you can shoot up to 12 frames per second with autofocus. So this is exactly the same burst speed as the Nikon D5, so that is crazy fast. But there's a bit of limitation. If you are shooting at 12 frames per second, you can only get the 12-bit RAW file, and also the auto exposure will only lock on the first frame. So once you start shooting, the exposure would remain the same. Personally, I don't think that is a big limitation, because when you are shooting at such high burst speed, normally you are shooting spots. So 12-bit RAW is probably enough, and also the exposure lock at the first frame is also not really a big problem. But if this is the problem for you, then you can drop it to 9.5 frames per second if you want 14-bit RAW. Now, but if you want both 14-bit RAW and you also want exposure to change between the frame, then you have to drop the speed to 5.5 frames per second. This is actually still not too slow, but it is a little bit slower than the D750. Both cameras don't have a very large buffer, but because the Z6 is using the much faster XQD card, so the time it takes to clear buffer is much faster. On the other hand, the Z6, just like the Z7, only has single card slot, while the D750 does have dual SD card slot. So it depends on how you're going to use the camera. The single card slot on the Z6 could be a deal breaker for you. Next, let's talk about something that the Z6 has and the D750 doesn't have, and this is the in-body image stabilizer. So the factory figures say the in-body image stabilizer on the Z6 is about 5-stop effective, and I did a bit of testing and my result is somewhere between 3 to 4 stops, so a little bit lower than the factory rating. But this is not unexpected. Normally my test result would be about 1 stop lower than the factory rating. This time it's slightly more than 1 stop, but probably just because of my the test variation. But anyway, with the in-body image stabilizer, this is definitely very good for people who are using a lot of prime lenses, because most of the prime lens doesn't have the VR on it. For example, if I'm shooting with this old 50 f1.4 manual focus lens, then suddenly now I have a 3 or 4 stop or 5 stop image stabilizer on it that I previously wouldn't have. And the in-body image stabilizer works in both when you're shooting photos and videos, so that is a very good news for videographer as well. Now, so far, almost everything we talk about the Z6 does either just as good as the D750 or it does better than the D750. But now there's one thing that the D750 definitely does a lot better than the Z6, and this is the battery life. So the factory rating for the Z6 is I think about 310 shots per charge, which is quite a lot lower than the one for the D750. D750, I actually don't know what is the factory rated the battery life, but I imagine it will be more like 1000 rather than 300. And in real life, the Z6, I can get a lot more than 300 shots. I can get close to 1000 shots quite easily with one battery. So while it is a lot better than the factory rating, it is still nowhere as good as the D750, because with the D750, in the past I can easily get 2000 or up to 3000 shots easily with one single battery. So this is 2-3 times better than what I can get from the Z6. And also another advantage with the D750 is you can turn on the camera and just look through the viewfinder, and it doesn't use much battery at all. While with the Z6, as soon as you turn on the camera, because it's either using the electronic viewfinder or the LCD screen, so it will use quite a bit of power just to give you the live feed, even if you are not taking any photo or any video. So if battery life is really important to you, then the D750 is still the better camera between the two. And one more thing that the Z6 does a lot better than the D750 is the video mode. With the D750, you can capture Full HD 1080p video. That was actually not too bad when it was released 4 years ago, but now at 2018, everything is 4K. And with the Z6, you can capture 4K video, and not only that, it's using the full image sensor size, and also it's doing the full sensor readout. It's not doing pixel skipping or anything like that, which would lower the quality. So I'm not even going to bother compare the video from the two camera, but if you really want to compare, the Z6 is just a lot cleaner, a lot higher resolution, a lot more detail. The rolling shutter is also better, and also it has the autofocus system that works very well compared to the D750. If you are shooting video using the autofocus on the D750, it kind of works, but you see the autofocus hunt quite a bit when you're switching between different focus distance. With the Z6, it's there's also virtually no hunting at all. But I do find the jumping, at least with the default setting, a little bit too quick, not organic enough. So if you want something more organic, then you can fine tune some of the settings to give you a smoother focus transition. But apart from that, the video from the Z6 is just very good. And also the high ISO video output from the Z6 is so good. Compared to the D750 at ISO 12800, the video from the D750 is pretty much unusable. But if you shoot video at 12,800 ISO using the Z6, the output is actually okay. Of course, it's not like very good because it's very high ISO, but it's definitely very usable. And even if you push it higher, 25,600 or 51,200, the video quality from the Z6 is still very acceptable. And if you want even better video quality, you can plug in external video recorder, because then you can get the 10-bit 422 output. Unfortunately, I don't have any external video recorder that can do 10-bit recording, so I can only look at the internal recorded video, but I'm very impressed by the quality from the internal recorded video anyway. So how does the D750 compare to the Z6? I guess it's fair to say the D750, while it is a very good camera, after 4 years, the Z6 is better than it in pretty much every single area. The image quality from the Z6 is definitely better than the D750, especially when you are trying to push it to the limit. Autofocus performance wise, overall I think they are quite similar. I would say the Z6 is slightly better than the D750, but the difference is not really huge. The electronic viewfinder on the Z6, in my opinion, is the biggest advantage if you switch from a D750 to the Z6, because it just a lot more versatile, it gives you a lot more information, and it handles different lighting situation a lot better. It's also slightly bigger than the one on the D750. And then the live view experience and also video recording on the Z6 is just so much better than the D750. And if you have a lot of old manual focus lenses, then I think you will love the Z6 as well, because shooting with manual focus lenses on the Z6 is just such a good experience, and also the accuracy and the result that you will get with the Z6 is a lot better than any DSLR. But if there's one thing that the D750 does a lot better than the Z6, it would be the battery life. The battery life on the Z6 is okay, I would say. It's not as bad as the factory rated battery life suggests to be, but it's still nowhere as good as the D750. With the D750, if I am going out for a 2 or 3 day trip, I would be happy to just not carry any battery charger or even spare battery, because I know that one battery should be enough to last 2-3 days of shooting quite easily. But with the Z6, if I'm going to do a 1 day of shooting, I would definitely want to carry maybe 1 or 2 spare battery, because the battery doesn't last that long.
Of course, I haven't forgot about the single card slot on the Z6. So if redundancy is very important to you, then the D750 would be the better camera for you.
The Z6 has another very good thing, which is the in-body image stabilizer. That means if you are shooting with any non-stabilized lens, then you suddenly have 3, 4, or 5 stop of image stabilization, which is something that the D750 doesn't have. So overall, comparing the two cameras, I would say the Z6 definitely is a much more versatile camera when you compare to the D750. The D750 is not bad camera at all, and I think it's still one of the better DSLR camera you can buy in the market today. But compared to the Z6, it just has so much more technology to it, which allow you to use the camera in many different ways that you couldn't do with a DSLR camera. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you find it useful. In my next video, I'm going to share with you my experience when I shoot professionally using the Nikon Z6 side by side with the D750. I'm going to share with you what my experience is like, what I like or don't like about the Z6 if I'm using it professionally. So yeah, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please subscribe so you won't miss the next video. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you also have a Z6, please share with me what you think about the camera, what are the things you like or what are the things you don't like in the section below. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you again very soon.